I didn't set out to write a book that would help people. I set out to write a book that would help myself, which is what I've done with every one of my books. I had questions that became sort of burning questions that I needed to explore, and the way that I explore everything that I know about life is as a writer on the page. One of my favorite writers is Joan Didion, and Joan Didion has said about her own work that if she had even the remotest access to her own mind, she never would have become a writer. And that she writes in order to understand what it is that she knows, what she thinks, what she fears, what she feels. And that is very true for me. And so a couple of years ago, I had moved with my husband and my son from the city to the country, to 10 acres on a hill in what felt like the middle of nowhere, which is actually the very small town of Bethlehem, Connecticut, right next to Washington Depot. And we had been through a very challenging time. We left the city in the wake of 9/11 and also in the wake of our son's very frightening illness. When he was 6 months old, he had been diagnosed with a seizure disorder that affects 7 out of a million babies, and only 15% of them make it. And we had a miracle, and he was completely fine. When we first moved to Connecticut, my mother was also diagnosed with lung cancer and was dying. My father had died very many years earlier. So there was trauma. There was, a sense of the other shoe dropping, or always the possibility of the other shoe dropping. But at the same time, it was a very peaceful and contented time in our lives. Our son Jacob was okay. Our marriage was great. Our careers were, it was one of those times in life where you wake up in the morning and think, I'm lucky. This is a lucky time. This is a good time. And yet at the same time, every night, like clockwork, at about 3 o'clock in the morning, I was waking up into this state of kind of a panic. My heart was pounding. I'd look at the clock. It would say 2:58, or it would say 3:01. It was always right sort of in that zone. How many people here wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning? I love doing this I think the first time I did this in an audience and I saw 2/3 of the hands go up, I thought, there should be one of those maps of the United States with little, red dots, little red lights on, wherever it's like, woman awake, woman awake. Because the thing about that is that one feels so alone in that time, at that moment, in that state. And I didn't understand what it was. I had a sense that, I began to have a sense that it was some kind of spiritual crisis. I don't know that I would have even used that word, spiritual crisis. I didn't think I was, sort of in line for a spiritual crisis, but there I was having one, or maybe another term for it would be an existential crisis. It was a feeling that I was falling and there was nothing to catch me. It was a feeling of I can't protect the people that I love, and how do I live with that? A feeling of I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, none of us do. How am I going to live with that? And I would just wake up with all these roiling feelings. It was as if I was going through my day and multitasking and getting everything done and working and marketing and getting dinner on the table and making sure homework got done and having all my to-do lists, the many, many to-do lists and the things on the refrigerator and all of that, and getting my kid to bed and reading and going to sleep, and then suddenly at 3 o'clock in the morning, there it was, like the thing that had been kind of just behind me all day long had kind of like caught up with me. And my previous novel, Black and White, had come out recently. I was sort of casting around and waiting and trying to be patient for the next idea to emerge. I assumed I would be working on another novel. And then one day, I was in the middle of my yoga practice. I had a very long time yoga practice, and I was in tree pose, which I won't demonstrate for you since I'm wearing heels. But I was standing there, with one leg up and kind of my hands like this. And suddenly the word devotion materialized. It was like as if it was in neon. I saw the word devotion. And along with it was the realization that, I wasn't going to write another novel. I was actually going to write another memoir, which was a horrifying thought. I never thought I would write another memoir. And the even more horrifying thought was that I needed to explore what this was that was happening to me, that I needed to write a memoir in some way about the kinds of questions that my son Jacob had been asking me. He was maybe 6 years old at the time, and 6, 7, and he was asking me the kinds of questions that kids ask about God and about death, you know, and about what I believed. He would say, you know, what do you believe? Do you believe in God? What do you think happens when we die? Where do we go? You know, those kinds of questions. And I had been raised in an Orthodox home in New Jersey. My father was from an Orthodox family from New York, and my mother was not Orthodox. She was in fact an atheist. There's a moment in Devotion where I run into my mother's oldest friend at an art gallery opening. My mother had passed away, and her friend Beverly said to me, "I never forgave your mother for marrying your father." This is quite something to hear. And she went on and she said, she was an atheist. What was an atheist doing with somebody with 2 sinks and 2 dishwashers? Now, I could tell you the story. Well, actually, it's probably worth telling you the story. It's not in the book, about how my parents met, because my conflicts about what I was going to do with myself as a spiritual seeker, coming from this Orthodox home, having abandoned any kind of ritualized Judaism, probably around the time that I went to college, not replacing it or doing anything about it for a long time, but filled with conflict about pride about where I came from, confusion about how to incorporate it into my life, confusion also about, you know, was it possible to incorporate aspects of it or elements of it into my life and not the whole thing. There's a story in Devotion where I was with Michael and Jacob, and we were in Venice, Italy, and we went to the Jewish ghetto. And my husband Michael, who's Jewish but would describe himself also as an atheist, we wandered into a Judaica store, and Michael said, "Let's get a mezuzah," which I can't begin to tell you how unlike my husband that statement was. Let's get a mezuzah. And I have a suitcase full of mezuzahs in the basement of my house. I have mezuzahs from every home, my parents, aunts, uncles, grandparents, but I didn't have one on our door. And I thought, you know what, this would be a lovely thing to get a mezuzah. So we were looking at this beautiful Venetian silver filigree work, and as we were standing in the Judaica store, I started to have a panic attack. I started feeling completely claustrophobic in this place and like I needed to get out. And I thought, what in the world is going on with me? I'm in a Judaica store in Venice, Italy. Why am I panicking? And afterwards, and after we did leave, and we bought the mezuzah, and we had it in its little plastic bag, and I realized that what was happening was that mentally I was counting every doorpost. I was trying to remember how many mezuzahs I would need to do this properly. You know, it wasn't just a mezuzah for the front door, it was a mezuzah for every door, but there were certain doors that they didn't go on, and I couldn't remember, and I didn't know the bracha, and I didn't have a rabbi.